I am from with my training. I have just come on and getting settled in as an ER doc in St. Joe's. So yes, please do say hi to me if you see me there. I will have an N95 on, but other than that, I look like this. So please say hello. Um, and I also took over as the medical director for the paramedic training program in town through Bellingham. So you'll see me in that context too, maybe out in the field checking on our students. So please say hello. Like Steve said, today we're going to be talking about continuous quality improvement and what that means and what the process looks like to introduce you all to the topic. But any topics that you want to be covered in these sessions, I am more than happy to either find somebody to talk about or talk about myself. I'm a huge believer in EMS being taught by EMS folks. So, I'm happy to cover topics and give them a little bit more of an EMS kind of spin. So they're more relevant to us in the field. And, we get a good idea of what is going on and how it's relevant to us, not just whatever the docs do once they get to the hospital. But yeah, so today we're going to talk about continuous quality improvement. That is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, but I want you all to know the process and I want you all to know what it looks like from our end. So at any point, if you guys have questions during the presentation, you can either, raise your hand if you want to, or just cut your mic on and chime in. I talk a lot, so feel free to interrupt me. And let's get going.
You can also put the questions in the chat, and I'll make sure that we
Okay.
cover it as well. We always have time, Emily, at the
Yeah.
end, questions and answers as well.
Yeah. And yeah, see if you can keep the eye on the chat. Then I don't have it open because it's all over the place, but yeah, I'll make sure to address those questions too. All right, cool. So a little bit about me. I mentioned I'm coming from Texas. I am originally from Florida. I graduated from the University of Florida. Go Gators. I know that's totally irrelevant up here. Um, and then I did my training in Dallas and Fort Worth. So two big systems, but one was entirely private EMS and one was entirely fire-based EMS. The fire-based, every single person was a paramedic, and then the private, most was EMT, with some paramedic crews and critical care medics. So I've had kind of a broad purview. Haven't done a lot of air medical, but you guys will probably meet Brian McNeely as well. He's another doc that just came on. He is the director for Airlift Northwest and handles a lot of the air stuff. So anything on the ground, I'm very familiar with. These are just some pictures to show you kind of my prior experience. I have a habit of getting photographed in front of car wrecks. So there you go. These are all the pictures of me from fellowship. I also have a specific interest in event medicine. So you can see that's me and one of our crews at a rave in Dallas on New Year's. I also was one of the NHL airway docs with the Dallas Stars for a while. So, and then we did a lot of SWAT ride-alongs and training. I'm not a SWAT doc, but I will sit in the back of the APC and take care of people as they are brought to me. But yeah, so got a lot of kind of varied experience there. But my job here is really to focus on BLS education and training as well as quality. So let's get into what we're actually talking about today. So I want to start with just laying the land of what is quality improvement. And I always say continuous quality improvement because this should be a continuous iterative process. Quality improvement is not a project that you check off and finish. It is a constant thing. It should be proactive instead of reactive. And there's a specific model for this. I don't know if y'all have seen this model of improvement before. I think it looks AI generated because the institute that created it, they've changed their name a couple of times, but they've settled on the Institute for Air Improvement, and its official name is the Model for Improvement. Really seems fully AI generated, and numbers were involved. But basically, what this does is give us kind of a framework of what we're supposed to be doing when we're improving our processes as a system, not even as an individual, massive system data. So this is it. We start with saying, what are we trying to accomplish here? If we're trying to improve our compression or are trying to ensure that all our semis get, and those kind of things. We're picking specific and we're picking something measurable. And then we need to know, how will we know if it's the problem, or how will we know if we improve our performance? So we need something that we can actually track, or we need to create a mechanism for us to be able to track what we're interested in. And then we need to know what change we can make to result in an improvement. So are we going to create a force in our patient? Are we going to give education to our crews? Those things can kind of together, and we can create that change and then measure the outcome after. Now, I imagine some of you will have heard or seen the dreaded second part of this diagram, which is the PDSA cycle, which stands for plan, do, study, and act. So we use that phrase a lot in quality improvement. And all it means is we create a plan for what we want to change, and then we change it. And then we see what the result is. And then we change our plan again based on the result. So, for example, if we wanted to change our CPR compression fraction and we did some training, and then we look back at the data and we realize that nothing's changed, well, now we have to do something different. So now we're doing a different kind of training. Now we're doing focused training for specific crews if that's an issue. Now we're looking at our CPR arrangement. Do we need to change the amount of people that we're sending so that there's more hands available? Those kind of things. So it's all an iterative process, and it's something that continues on throughout time. And every time you make a change, you study it to see if it works, and then you put it back into the cycle again. So I think this is a really important distinction too, is what is not quality improvement. So I think quality improvement gets a bad rap, and sometimes deservedly so, right? It's kind of, I as a doctor, when I get one of my cases called to any sort of quality improvement thing, I'm immediately like, oh man, what did I do? So it's, not a comfortable thing to have your cases and your decision making examined and looked at. But I want to be really clear on what quality improvement is not. Quality improvement does not involve any disciplinary action whatsoever. CQI is protected by law, so you are not able to be, reprimanded or anything in the context of a quality improvement. We can give you feedback, and we can suggest, and we can offer training and education, but we can't reprimand you as a result of a quality improvement. So if you're in a case review or something like that, you're not getting reprimanded. It's just us saying, hey, there was something interesting going on. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes we're like, how did you do that? I've had a few of those where I'm like, actually, I need to talk to you because you just did the best thing I've ever seen, and I want to know how that happened. So don't be concerned about disciplinary action going into this. That is not my purview. Now, quality improvement, sometimes when we get in a big group, especially in the context of like a case review or something, sometimes the fingers start pointing. That is not quality improvement. That is not conducive. Assigning blame is never part of it. We can provide education on specific things if specific people have questions, but really our goal is to look at system level things so we can see system data, because changing the behavior of one individual person is so rarely going to create a systems change that it's not really worth it. So assigning blame to one person doesn't fix anything. It just makes people less likely to participate in quality improvement. Now, the other thing is we don't want to just pin ourselves to outcomes. I call this the "but did you die" approach. So it doesn't matter what our care is as long as the person survived, or as long as the person got to the cath lab, or as long as whatever. We want to make sure that we're tracking our specific metrics that are important to patient care, regardless of the outcome, which sounds kind of counterintuitive. You would think we would really want to focus on the outcome. And we do to some extent, but we don't want to pin it on just they survived, so it's fine. Also, I know you guys know it's not always easy to get the outcome data ultimately for the patient. So we want to make sure what we do before we hand the patient off is as quality as possible, regardless of what happens once they get to the hospital. And then we want to make sure that we're open and we're willing to change when we identify an issue that needs to be changed. So change is really hard, and it's really important also because it gets us to where we want to be. Now, there's a distinction between quality improvement and quality assurance. And I think QI, QA, I've even seen them in different systems written out and used interchangeably. There's a huge difference there. Quality improvement is prospective. We're looking for things that are an issue. We're constantly surveilling and we're improving based off of our current baseline. Quality assurance is saying, hey, we expect this much. We're making sure that our people are performing up to this standard. So quality improvement is constantly looking forward, while quality assurance is more of a review process looking backwards. So that's kind of the distinction here. Any questions so far? All good? All right. So I kind of want to talk about what happens when we have a good quality improvement system. So these things are based off of two different models that I've seen go for quality management and quality improvement systems previously. They have nothing to do with the system here. These are all stuff that's way back in different states, and these are kind of the tropes that we see in the QI space. So there's two different ways this can go, and these are the extremes. You can have one system where QI is kind of a dirty word. So if you have mistakes, they're met with immediate discipline or immediate assigning of blame.
We did it. Nice. We did it.
Hey guys, welcome. Yeah. Okay, we're good. Okay. So we were just chatting about kind of how QI works in different systems. And I was saying there's kind of two different ways that this can go. So in one system, you may have where QI is immediately a dirty word because folks are met with discipline or blame when they have a mistake or an error that occurs in the field. Now, the thing about QI is if you get a case that's being looked at, you want to know exactly what's going to happen. The it depends approach is where things fall apart. So you want to know the exact process. So in a system with a really variable process of how we look at cases and how we decide what needs to be reviewed, that process being really opaque leads to people not really trusting you when you're looking at cases because they don't know what's going to happen when you pull up a case, right? So a variable process doesn't build trust and it doesn't work very well with quality improvement to get people invested in the process. And if you only hear from QI when something bad happens, obviously it's the boogeyman, right? We don't want to be the person that only shows up when something bad happens or when something goes wrong or an error is made. We want to be the person that also shows up and says, hey, that was really awesome, and give you constant feedback on things that you want to hear about, like your CPR performance or, calling STEMI alerts or anything you can think of. So we want to be that person that actually proactively shows you what you're doing and gives you praise when you deserve it, right? Now, system two over here is kind of the dream, right? You have a clear QI process. So every single time something happens, you know exactly how your case is going to get reviewed. You know what gets reviewed and you know the process. You know who's going to call you, who's going to talk to you, and what's going to happen after that, right? And then you want a system where mistakes are met with curiosity. Might not be a mistake at all. And I've had probably a third to a half of the case reviews that I've done in other systems. There's been some scene mitigating factor, like, hey, we tried to do high quality CPR, but the person's pit bull got through the door and they were chasing us around. Those kind of things where you find a mitigating factor. So you want to meet anything that looks fishy or funky with curiosity and not just immediately assigning blame. And then you want to know that QI also acknowledges great care. So, for example, in the prior system, we used to show up to the stations and give out stickers for the ambulance and all these other things and big plaques every time somebody had a CPR case that walked out of the hospital with good neurologic function. So we had lifesaver awards is what we called them. So we want a system where you can also get acknowledged for doing well. And then I think a really important part and something that I've seen work well in the past is the actual provider. So you guys can ask me or anybody that's reviewing your case about cases. So you can say, hey, this thing happened. it was weird. Do you mind just taking a look at this? Or, hey, we did this really cool CPR. I want to know what you think about it. So anything where you have the ability to proactively reach out and say, hey, this was kind of funky, or hey, this was great. We can kind of take a look at stuff that you want to know about. So those are kind of the two extremes. Obviously, there's one that's ideal, but you can see how, if we don't have a great QI process, you can end up in the red here. Now, this is a really important quote. And in my prior system in Fort Worth, we had one paramedic specialist that worked in the office. His whole job was data and CQI. And he said this probably once a week. He had a mug with it on it, he had a t-shirt with it on it. So this is a really, really important phrase in the context of quality improvement. And this is some business gentleman from way back in like the 1940s. So, this is whatever. But the quote is, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Now, what that means in the context of EMS is if a mistake happens, or if some outcome is not as frequent as we want, or our intubation success rate isn't as high as we want, that's not necessarily because some particular individual doesn't know whatever, or because people aren't trying their hardest. It's because the system is designed that way. So in order to improve, we need to change the system. So it's much less of a focus on individuals and much more of a focus on the actual design of the system to get the results that we actually want. If we're not getting the results we want, then that means that the system is not set up to get those results. So I think the most anxiety provoking part of a CQI system as a provider is when you get a case that is being reviewed. So I want to kind of go through that process with you all so you can see exactly from my side, from the doc side, what I'm looking at when I look at a case. And this is with the caveat that I have not started doing any sort of case reviews or anything for you all yet. So this is still not something that's, going live. I don't want you to worry. This is not something you have to worry about right now. But before any of this starts, I want you to guys have a really good idea of what I'm seeing and what I'm looking at. So you guys know the process and what I'm looking at from this side. And then if you have questions before we, implement any of this, you have plenty of time to think it over, kind of figure out what your response to this process is going to be. And then you can just ask me or tell me about it because I want to hear you guys' feedback. So let's look at a case together. First thing I do is I open up the chart and I read the narrative. Sounds obvious, right? So let's go through this one. So I totally made up this case. It is not really based on any case I've seen before. It was actually based off an article about QI. So this has nothing to do with anything you'll do here. But it is a BLS ALS combo case. Okay. So on this one, you have BLS arrives on scene first with a 71-year-old male with respiratory distress. Wife tells you he has COPD and some seasonal allergies, and he's allergic to peanuts or something. He has an EpiPen somewhere. He's been using increasing home O2 for the last 2 days. Primary assessment, you hear wheezing, you hear stridor, you hear decreased level, or you see that the patient's a little confused, not quite waking up like normal. His O2 sat is 77% on room air. You put a non-rebreather on him and it goes up to 89%, but that's kind of the highest you can get it. As soon as you see this person and walk in and they're super sick, ALS was dispatched by the BLS crew. And they got there in about 20 minutes was their ETA. You're pretty far out in the county for this one. So during that time, the patient became more somnolent and they lost consciousness. They would appear to be protecting their airway. So BVM was started. There was no gag reflex when putting in NPAs and OPAs and all your airway adjuncts. So an iGel was placed. So whatever brand you have loyalty to, we use iGels here. They're my favorite. But supraglottic airway was placed and secured with a holder. Their end tidal initially was 55, which is a good end tidal. The ALS crew arrived and the patient was moved to their ALS transport. During the transport, patient noted to be bradycardic down to 22 on the monitor without a palpable pulse. So CPR was initiated, IO was established, epi was given ×2, and the patient was intubated. They got ROSC, and then they arrived at ED, and the patient went off to the ICU after that. So a lot of stuff happened in this case. So immediately I'm like, oh, this is complicated. We're going to have to take a look at these details pretty extensively to figure out why this patient lost consciousness and then coded. So next thing I do is I look at the vital signs. And this is why it's super, super important to get as many vital signs in there as we can, because this is the trend that tells me what's happening with the patient retrospectively. I'll never get full detail just from the chart, but as much detail as I can get. A lot of times my questions are answered just by looking at the vital sign trend. And then I don't even necessarily have to talk to anybody because it's very obvious kind of what happened with the chart and the story. So for this patient, you can see they arrived on scene. He was tachycardic, he was hypoxic, afebrile, and then all of a sudden the eye gel's in. We get an end tidal reading for the first time. And then it's about 10 minutes later, then I assume that's when the code is going on because we don't have a BP, we don't have an SpO2, and then our heart rate is recorded down at 22. Now, a heart rate of 22 tells me that's probably PEA. That's probably a pulseless patient at this point because it's very hard to have a pulse at a heart rate of 22. And then we see post code, they have another set of vital signs with a little hypotensive, which we expect after a code. They're tachycardic, their SAT is great, and now they have an ET tube in place. And they have an end tidal reading as well on that ET tube. So sometimes when I look at a chart, there's a lot that happens between the vital signs that I can't see. So I look at something like this and I have questions because I don't know what happened there's, a 16-minute gap between the first set, and then there's another 10-minute gap, which is not totally unreasonable between 10 minutes, but there's not a whole lot of trending that I can see off of this. So you can see looking back at this, I'm like, oh, something happened in between, especially that second set and the third set, right? So the next thing that I do is look at the medications. So the medications and procedures will tell me, what they use to intubate, all those stuff. I know you guys are very used to looking at these charts, but this is kind of where I start piecing the story together. So I can see that oxygen was applied immediately. I can see that ketamine and rocuronium were used by the ALS crew once they got there to intubate. And then that's kind of all the information I have on the back end. I'll check the doses and make sure that they look appropriate. That has not too much to do with BLS, but a lot of these cases end up being kind of a combo deal when they get reviewed for BLS cases. So we will also, check the ALS work to make sure that it's up to par and that we don't have anything we need to address on a system basis. Now, the next thing that I will do, if it's available, for those of you that use life packs and are able to upload them, we do have access sometimes to the actual monitor file. So I can open it up and I can look and see that gives me a continuous trend on the patient. So it's super helpful in cases like this where something wild happened and we got to figure out what's going on. Because I can see the SpO2, I can see the heart rate tracing the whole time, I can see a 12 lead if it was taken, I can see the end tidal waveform if it's plugged into the life pack. If it's on a separate device, which we'll talk about, then that's less so. And I'm relying on the different recordings and the vital signs. But I get a lot more information that way, and I can also see CPR performance. So it's really, really cool for me, at least, to be able to look back and see those kind of things on the monitor file. If it's not there, then I just go off the run sheet, and that's all the information I get. But quick note on end tidal, because coming soon to an agency near you, you're going to have your own end tidal recordings. The devices that you all are getting are they're inline end tidal, so they plug actually into the circuit. And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. I looked at the devices. I think that's where we're going, but They do have a reading on the screen that's going to be kind of in your stack for your airway tower connected to the patient. And they do have a small display that will show you the waveform of end tidal, which I encourage you. We're going to give you some education about this. We won't leave you flying blind, but as a quick introduction, the waveform is the best part of end tidal. The number, plus minus, you can use it. It's great. It tells you what's going on. It's better than nothing. But the waveform is massive. It gives you a ton of information about the patient. So you can think of end tidal if you've ever seen tracings like with a ventilator where someone's inspiring and then they hold and then they're expiring. It's the exact opposite. So with end tidal, we're measuring expiration because the CO2 comes out when we expire, right? So you have this, we call it 4-phase waveform end tidal. So you can see the phases on here. You've got that flat phase at 0 while they're inspiring because you're not expiring any CO2 while you're breathing in. And then as they breathe out, the number shoots up. And then as they continuously breathe out, that number will be pretty stable throughout their whole expiration. So you get that top plateau. And then they stop breathing and they inspire and the number shoots back down to 0. So you get this nice box pattern in a normally breathing patient. Now, there's a couple of different things that the waveform will tell you. One, if you have somebody with really bad asthma or COPD, you can see on the right here, they get this shark fin kind of pattern. That's because they have trouble in those conditions actually getting the air out. It's less of an issue getting air in. It's more that they can't contract their chest and get the air out. So that expiratory upstroke is delayed because the air is not all leaving at once. So it looks like, we call it the jaws of death. You see the jaws coming, that person is impending, COPD or asthma disaster because they have a lot of bronchospasm. You can see if they're breathing fast, if they're breathing slow, it gives you a more accurate respiratory rate than the pulse ox will ever be able to do. And then it also can tell you if they're over sedated, if their end tidal is dropping or getting really high and they're not breathing as much as you want. You can tell those kind of things from how the end tidal looks. The most important thing you can tell is breath to breath if your airway's still in place. So this is the thing that's a game changer. If we're going to be doing supraglottic airways like iGels, then end tidal is huge. In fact, where I'm from in Texas, it was state law that anytime you put an invasive airway in, you had to have a 4-phase waveform end tidal monitor on it. So you could tell when it gets dislodged. I think any of us that have used supraglottics know that they're fantastic in a pinch, but they're not exactly a definitive airway. They can move around when you move the patient, and so can ET tubes, by the way. So making sure that they're constantly in place is huge. So you'll see on the top left of the small boxes that you have 2 good breaths with normal square waveforms, and then all of a sudden it tapers off. That is a sign that either your circuit got disconnected or the airway is no longer ventilating the patient. So going back to this case, if I'm looking at the monitor file, I pull up, the view, I scroll through, and I see this end tidal waveform around the time, like a couple minutes before the patient started having bradycardia and then ended up losing a pulse. So I can see that the pulse ox, right after I see this, starts getting a really spotty reading. And, that happens with pulse oxes. They're nowhere near perfect. So you can see it kind of stop reading and you can see it intermittently picking up hypoxic, but, not too bad. Sometimes it's okay. And then you see the end tidal waveform and then it keeps kind of trailing off and the max that you see is about 10. Now normal is 35 to 45. COPD folks that are retaining carbon dioxide can be way higher than that. They can be 80, they can be 100. So this guy being 55 is kind of expected. But under 10 is consistent with somebody who doesn't have any circulating blood. They're not able to produce enough carbon dioxide to breathe off because they're not getting oxygen because their blood's not flowing. So in a code, you'll see some end tidal and it'll usually be like 10 to 20. So under 10 means I don't have a pulse and I'm not getting CPR, or I'm getting CPR, but I've been dead for a while. So those kind of things. So if you see an end tidal under 10, that's a panic. That's concerning for somebody that doesn't have a pulse. So their next move needs to be check the pulse. So I see that waveform and I see it kind of taper off. And then I see on the leads, the QRS starts getting wider and the rhythm starts getting slower. Now that tells me that this is probably PEA. Obviously, I'm not there, so I didn't feel the patient's pulse. I don't know for sure, but that rhythm change will tell me kind of when that probably happened. And then I see CPR start. During the CPR, we see great performance, let's just say. And then we see the intubation attempt, and we can review that video with the ALS crew, all that jazz. And then after we get the end tidal, or after we get the ET tube placed, we see the end tidal shoot back up to 60. And then we see that waveform come back. That's telling me that the patient now has a secure airway that is ventilating them properly. So my initial questions kind of going through this case, and I like to keep a little list as I go, is how is the patient being monitored? Do we have them on all our monitors? Do we have only some channels plugged in? Is there a life pack? Are we doing, is there an AED on the patient? And what kind of information does the crew actually have available on scene? Was end tidal monitoring used throughout? So you guys don't currently have end tidal across the board. That's something we're trying to fix because I think it's super important. But once you have that tool, we got to use it because it's awesome and it tells us what we need to do. Was the end tidal actually used through this case, especially since there was an invasive airway? Was the pulse ox, when it was starting to go down, was it noticed or was it unnoticed? Was the crew taking actions to fix it and they just weren't working? Or was it not noticed when it was happening? Because for all I know, the crew's, bagging the heck out of this patient and they're doing everything they possibly can to fix it and it's just not working. Or was it just not able to be noticed by the crew due to other stuff going on and we just didn't react fast enough because we didn't know we were having a problem? Were there equipment issues at play? So every single time I do one of these case reviews, I find out that something was going on with some piece of equipment. So I want to know, was the pulse ox working or did they have to change it out 6 different times to get a reading? Was the end tidal functioning? Was the life pack or whatever monitoring device we're using actually visible to the crew? Was there an issue once ALS got there with their equipment? All of those things. And then I want to know why the patient coded. That I can kind of get from the monitor file. In this case, it looks like this airway probably got dislodged at some point because we lost that end tidal waveform. And then we see the pulse ox get spotty and go. So the patient probably got hypoxic. And then we see the heart rate slow, which is probably the patient coded due to hypoxic arrest. And then once the code started, how was the cardiac arrest care from there? We're looking at compression fraction. We're looking at meds. We're looking at all those things. And we can see all that from the monitor file if it's available. So that's all the background that I do before I talk to anybody. So I've already got the narrative kind of built. I have my list of questions. And then I want to talk to the people that were actually there because there's only so much that I can figure out from, looking in the background. If it's a really simple case, like there was one little thing that happened and I can tell from the run report or from all the collateral that I already have that there wasn't really an error made or there wasn't really anything that I'm concerned about a systems issue for, then I can just send feedback saying, great job, or hey, maybe a nitpick, but try this next time. And we can move on with our lives. So most of these cases, we don't actually have to talk to the crews. But in something like this, I would definitely want to talk to folks because there's a lot of stuff that I can't tell from the monitor file that the people on scene will actually be able to tell me. So in this case, this is the part where I would actually call this like a case review, right? So it varies by system. Some of the systems I've worked in, every single case, I chatted with the crew directly, and we just had kind of informal sit downs, either at the stations, via Zoom, at the medical direction office, whatever they wanted. Some people were more formal about it, and then sometimes we would have the EMS supervisors actually go out and have the conversation and then kind of report back to us. It all depends on what people are comfortable with, where they feel comfortable talking, and what they want to, kind of get out of the actual conversation. So we always give the crew a chance to review what they did and what they looked at and what they documented. Because I don't know about you, but I worked last night until 3 a.m. I do not remember everything that I did for every patient, even last night. So I don't expect anybody to remember all the fine details of a case they did like 2 weeks ago. So it's always the opportunity of, we're going to give you a chance to review it, think about if you can remember this case. If you can't, fine, we can work with it. That's totally fine. And then I'll share all the information that I have with the crew, because I know there's a lot of stuff that I can see on the back end that the crew can't necessarily see in a lot of cases. So I want you to have all the information that I have so you can see what I'm seeing, and then we can have like an actual productive conversation and not just, going back and forth. We figure out a ton of info this way. Half the time we figure out there was something going on scene that makes perfect sense, and then we're done. And there was no mistake, there was no nothing. That's just how this case went. And then we move on with our lives, and we see, like, if it's a safety issue, how can we help that? Those kind of things. And then that gives us the opportunity to provide some education. So, for example, in this case, we would talk about end tidal and what that means, what a dislodged airway is and things to look out for, and troubleshooting a dislodged airway. So we get that direct time with crews when something like this happens to talk about how we prevent this from happening again, and get some good education in so we can get those touches and make sure that we're, keeping up the education quality as we go. So here's how the conversation goes from front to back. I will ideally tell everyone why this case is being reviewed beforehand. You should know why your case is being looked at prior to you having a conversation with anybody. There should be no surprises going into this process. Now, you should have an opportunity to review your run chart, and you should have an opportunity to walk through the case. If you can't remember anything from this case, I've been on scenes where a case has been reviewed for like a CPR as, medical direction. I showed up in the field, and then I couldn't remember the details of the case when it went to review. So it's totally fine if you don't remember anything. That you should have the opportunity to refresh yourself, and you should have the opportunity to kind of walk whoever's reviewing the case through your perspective on scene, because that gives us a lot more insight than what we can see. So then we'll go over the monitor file if it's available. We'll go over the data and the run sheet together so we can all be on the same page of what we're talking about. And we'll just chat about what we see. So in this case, I would say, hey, I noticed that this patient coded. It looks like, to me, based off of what we see, that the airway got dislodged, and I'll tell you why I think that. And then we can kind of talk about what was going on during that time on scene so we can tell from there. And then we're going to discuss why. So was anybody noticing the pulse ox dropping and trying to fix it? Or was the pulse ox just being changed out a bunch of times because the assumption was it wasn't working? And it was an equipment issue versus the patient actually being hypoxic? Was the end tidal in a place where everyone could actually see it physically? Or was it, hard to read from a distance, all those things. And then, or was it just like an honest mistake, which happens? And that's why we have these things that's in a protected environment so we can talk about how to prevent it next time. And then what can we do to fix it? This is where the education piece comes in. This is where we chat about, what we might need to do a little more work on. And honestly, this is where we find a lot of systems issues that we bring back into that PDSA, that iterative process cycle. So we find, the pulse oxes never work because the adhesive we got on the new ones doesn't stick. And therefore, every time the pulse ox goes, we always assume that it's an equipment issue, and we're not looking at the patient as much as we should. And that's not just this crew, that's every crew. So we find stuff like that. So what do we do with this info? We identify the issues that are clinically important. So in this case, dislodged airway, that's a big deal. End tidal interpretation, that's a big deal. And then we go back and we look at the system as a whole. Are we having a lot of these cases, or is this a one-off? And then we decide from there, okay, this is a one-off, we provided education to that crew. They're all tuned up, they're awesome, they're ready to go. Or is this happening all over the place? And we need to do some interventions to fix this on a system level. And then we design those and we test them and we go back through that cycle. So this is a quick list of things that I would take away from this kind of case. Per protocol, starting at dispatch, ALS should have been added on this case. Why weren't they? Did it go off the wrong card? Did we miss something in dispatch? Was the chief complaint not clear? We can review that too. So we can go all the way back to the dispatch point and review those cases and figure out what's going on. From an equipment standpoint, in this case, and kind of the example here, this was actually stuff that happened in my prior system. All the monitor alarms were turned off because they went off all the time and everyone was annoyed by them. So the hypoxia alarm, the real thing, the hypoxia alarm was going off, but it was only on the screen. It wasn't out loud. So no one noticed for a little while because all the alarms were turned off. Because all of these things have alarm fatigue with them. We do this in the hospital too. I constantly go in rooms and silence the alarms, and then I look to see what it was alarming for. So this is not a EMS specific issue, but if we change all the presets, then we can fix this. Does BLS have consistent access to end tidal? Were they able to appropriately monitor this airway that was put in? And then one thing that we found in a previous thing is the mounting we were using for our life packs in the previous system in our ambulances, the actual monitor was like practically reversed. So you couldn't even see it when you were driving. So that's not conducive to set you up for success. And that's a good equipment issue that we can fix. And then education-wise, we kind of already talked about this, but we'll go over the importance of constant end tidal monitoring for invasive airways. And then we'll go back and see, does the whole system need a refresher on this? And then we can design that from there. So now we've identified, let's say we're getting a few of these cases where the airway's dislodged and we're having end tidal functioning problems and we need an update on that in our system. So what change do we actually make from a CQI standpoint, going past the case review to the whole system? There's a hierarchy of what changes work. The lowest thing you can imagine is an email. Sending out an email saying, hey, be careful, almost never works and almost never creates any change. Because if you're anything like me, you see an email like that and you just delete it, or you kind of read it and then you go, okay, sure, I'll be more careful. But you don't think about that when you're on scene with a critical patient. You're like, oh man, that email though, you just totally put that out of your mind, right? So those are our low value targets. And for low value things that we need to change, that might be a good starting place of like, this isn't worth a ton of effort, so let's see if an email works, kind of thing. The highest function thing to immediately see change are forcing functions. So for example, if we want 2 sets of vitals on every patient, we make it an image trend validation rule that you have to put in 2 sets of vitals before you can reach 100% validation. Now you have to do it whether you want to or not. So we've immediately kind of fixed the issue. These can be kind of annoying because they make you do something that you're not used to doing. And sometimes it's not always easy to do, but they are the most effective. So sometimes we end up in the middle. We change the protocol, we educate, we give expectations, those kind of things. And then we, fix equipment issues, all those other things. But there is a hierarchy of those kind of things to set you up for success. The ones in red are the hardest to implement, but they're the ones that set you up the best. And then we head back into our cycle. We make a change, we study it, we see if it worked, and then we go back and change something else if it doesn't. So this is what I'm looking at after that. This is called a run chart. You do not need to know this, but you might see it. So I want you to know what you're looking at. So this is what we look at. Say we're talking about intubation success rates. So all these little dots will be a different week or a different month going forward. And then you can see that red line going across is, say, 80%. We want that up to 90%. So we go back and we re-educate everybody on how to intubate. We go to all the stations, we do an intubation masterclass, and that dot, right when that arrow says change, is the day that we did that. And then after that, you can see there's still some variation, but the average changes a lot. So you can see the new average is much higher. That shows me that whatever intervention we did worked, and we've made a change that's lasting. Now, there is one drop there. That's an unexpected event. Let's say we only had 2 intubations that month, and one of them was an airway disaster that was bleeding and a really hard intubation. Well, that's, not necessarily fair to look at the whole system based on that one, because a lot of people wouldn't have got that the first time. So we see some variation, but this is how we test our change, is we see that the things are, moving up to the way that we want them to. And we look at the average of the whole system, not just individual cases. All right. So these are all improvements that I have made from case reviews and from CQI and prior systems. We found out our end tidal cannulas in a previous system were trash. We threw them out. We bought new ones that actually connect to the life pack reliably. So that the kind of stuff, equipment issues all the time. We created hospice protocols because we found out lots of calls were showing up with hospice patients and family members that didn't know what to do. So they just called 911. So we created a whole protocol to kind of take us out of that system. We implemented PID crew CPR because we found out we didn't have enough hands to get great CPR performance. We switched from rapid sequence intubation to a delayed sequence intubation to make sure that we're not making people hypoxic and all those other things that we really care about when we're talking about managing somebody's airway. We changed our image trend layout because we found out putting in stroke scores was really hard and annoying, and you had to go to 6 separate screens. So we changed it to make it easy. And then immediately compliance went up. We had a protocol for applying mechanical CPR device because we found out that people were taking like 2 minutes to snap it on because they didn't get any training on it. So we created a protocol on how to do it. We streamlined our intubation checklist and make sure that we tape that sucker on every single BL box so that every time you went to do an intubation, you had a checklist right in front of you and you didn't have to think about it in terms of other things. So obviously these are not all BLS changes, but these are all things that we found through doing case reviews that we otherwise probably wouldn't have known about and helped improve the entire system to a great degree. So wrapping up, I know I talked a lot. I said I wouldn't take the whole hour, and I did. So I apologize, but we've still got a couple minutes left. But so what I want you to remember from this is really that CQI and case reviews are a massive and important part of a functioning and improving EMS system, which is what we all want to be. We all want to do our jobs as well as possible. So this is an integral part. If we don't know and we don't look, then we can't prove that we're good at our jobs. And that's what I want to do. I want to prove that you guys are good at your jobs, and I want to make you the best at your jobs that you can possibly be. And if we don't have the data and we don't know, then we can't tell you that for sure. So that's the goal here. A good case review should be approached with curiosity, never with blame. So if you hear from me or if you hear from anybody and you're seeing your case come up for something, know that I just kind of want to chat with you. I've got questions. I can only see the back end. I have no idea what it was actually like on scene. I've been in the field. I worked as an EMT for a little while, and then I also did a lot of field response during my fellowship training in Dallas. So I know what it's like, and I know there's a lot of stuff that happens that I cannot see on paper. So I just want to hear what it was like from your perspective, and I probably don't have all that much feedback a lot of times. And if I do, it's probably like 1 or 2 little kind of small things. And then ideas from case reviews, as you can see, create tons of change. We're already seeing this here a little bit. We're creating change and we're tracking data that we never would have thought to track necessarily. But some random thing that came up in case reviews is already showing us systems things that we can improve and we can get better on. So going forward, the goal from our EMS office is to build out a continuous quality improvement system. So we want to know how we're doing in things that we care about and things that matter to patients. And we want to help you all get that data, and we want to help you all know where you're at and what we need to work on and what we're already really good at, and maybe we can help other people improve on. So I want you to think about, those of you that have had experience with case reviews and CQI in the past, what does your ideal system look like? If you have a case that's weird, do you want the ability to be able to submit a case and talk directly to me? Do you want to talk with your supervisors or your captains and not have me involved unless it's something wild? Do you want this to all be through image trend? Do you want to be able to email or call or text me, anything? I want you all to think about this going forward. And then I'd love to hear from, each and every one of you about what your thoughts are on how best to do this. Because really, the nice part about this is we have free range. We have certain things that are in place already, but we can change and we can build whatever we want. So I want to hear from you on how we can be helpful to you. I don't want to impose a system that no one's going to like. I want you guys to have agency in what we're building here. So with that, I have left exactly 3 minutes for questions. I apologize for yapping my head off, but I, as you can tell, am a nerd and really enjoy this subject. So happy to take any questions. Happy to, talk for 3 more minutes and fill space. But anybody have any questions for me?
There's nothing in the chat. What I want to do real quick before if there are any other questions come up is just show everybody what the Emma looks like. So I'm going to see if I can do this real quick.
Oh, do you need me to stop sharing?
That's all right.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah. So that's what the Emma looks like. I hope everybody's seeing it. We've developed a video thanks to one of the paramedics at Bellingham. It's a 3-minute and 49-second video. We also have a handout to go with it. We created that in-house. And it's going to go to the education committee, I believe, in February, and then we'll start rolling it out. That's the plan, but that's what it looks like. There's the waveforms as well, numbers as well. It's really becomes compact like this. So that's what it looks like. I believe they're being housed right now at District 14. And once we have the plan to roll them out with training and education, but it'll be a video handout as well. And it's a pretty cool device. And thanks to the grant, we're able to purchase 16 of them. And how it's going to be rolled out, it'll be up to the chiefs and training officers and the education. So that's what it looks like. So I'm going to stop my share real quick. And there is a question here. Hold on here.
Yeah, that was me. Okay. I put my email in the chat. Any of you are welcome to email me at any time with questions, concerns, curiosities, anything. I check that email pretty frequently, so feel free to, but I'm happy to answer any questions now, or you can direct them to me via email, whatever you prefer.
I do have a question for you, Emily. I've got a couple questions for you. Just real quick is, since we are revising our CQI process, I think it's really important to talk about how our feedback loop is going to work and what we've been talking about. So if you could just address that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so this is the part where we really kind of get to build whatever we want. Sometimes folks feel more comfortable talking to their direct supervisors in terms of feedback. I get that, the docs showing up on, to the station and all those things is not always, I sometimes feel like, sometimes in my prior systems, I would feel like Darth Vader, like I could feel the Imperial March music playing in the background as I walk in, even if I'm there for a good thing. So I totally get that. I don't want to, intrude on anybody's space. I don't want to mess with that. But if that's something you want, if you want to talk directly to me about things, about feedback, or if you want me to show up in person, I can do that. I'm more than happy to. I love going to stations and seeing y'all's workspace and seeing you get so much, it's so much more fun, honestly, for me. So I'm happy to do that. And then I get to know you all personally, and that's really awesome. Because everybody here has been incredibly nice and wonderful and welcoming to me so far. So I'm really excited about getting to know you all. But if that's not what we want, then that's totally fine. I will not be offended if you guys would rather talk to supervisors for feedback, or honestly for simple stuff, most likely there's a messaging function in image trend. That's the easiest thing. So if it's just like one little, hey, little nitpicky thing, maybe next time try this, I'll probably just send that through image trend, because there's no point in, wasting your time with a big old, meeting and everything to tell you like one tiny thing. That's stuff that we can just, message through image trend. As I'm reviewing the chart, I could just say, hey, here you go. But bigger feedback or like a case review, we have the options of how we want to do that. So I kind of want to hear from you all, what would make you most comfortable. This is a new system, so we get to decide. But I'm happy to do it personally. I'm happy to, have chat with our supervisors and see if that would be more comfortable for them to do, or if that's feasible, whatever we want.
Right. Well, that's one part of the follow-up loop. The other follow-up loop, I guess, maybe I wasn't clear with my question, is that when we have our CQI meeting and we come up with something, we're going to have something come out to the field to let them know what we've discussed and where we're moving forward. Just like we were talking about with the vital signs, we're coming up with a review that everybody will know what we're looking for and why we're looking for. So there will be some kind of communication. We're not sure how that's going to work. That's what I was. I wasn't clear. Yeah. That's what I. Yeah.
So our first communication related to CQI is coming very soon, fresh off the last CQI committee. I think the plan right now is for it to go to the district chiefs and also the training officers. But that will probably come out by the end of this, or will come out by the end of this week. So we'll see who the best people are to contact with that kind of like systems level stuff. Right. I was just talking about case review stuff and like individuals. But system level stuff will come down through leadership, training officers, all those people.
Right. I just want to make sure that it's something we've been trying to develop, and now we're moving really close to that feedback loop out to the field. All right. Well, I can ask a bunch more questions, but we're a little over our time. Does anybody else have any other questions? Hearing none. Emily, thank you very much for that great presentation and that introduction to CQI and our process. And I like that case review component and all what you're looking for from a physician standpoint. The other thing that just remember when you're documenting your case and image trend, it's really important that the data completion component is there, and please review it before you submit it, just to make sure you have all the details. It really helps out when we go to start doing some reviewing as well. And of course, if you've got a good case, like Emily said, please pass it on to us, because if you've learned something, I can guarantee that the system wants to learn as well. All right. Well, thanks, Emily. I appreciate it very much. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm not sure of the next date for our BLS focused training, but you'll see it either to the training office as well as the Rescue Hub. This recording will also be on Rescue Hub and also be on Whatcom County Administrative Office YouTube channel coming soon. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Be safe. Stay warm.
Bye, everybody. Nice to meet you all. Look forward to working with you.